Hello, this is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio show. We're coming to you live from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. And the place is jumping tonight, as it usually is. And there's a nice background buzz of folks eating and drinking and having a good time. And if you're in downtown Bismarck on this evening, it's the temperature's a bit higher and it's comfortable to walk around outside. In fact, I forgot my jacket when I was coming over here, so come on down and join us and have a drink, have a nice meal. It's a wonderful place to be. We're going to be speaking this evening to Stuart Savalkal, who is the director of the North Dakota Public Employees Association, which is soon to be merged with the North Dakota Education Association to form an organization called North Dakota United. We also have with us Senator Ron Carlisle. He's a Republican from Bismarck. We're going to be talking in the first half hour about state employee pay and competing proposals from the House and Senate. In the second half hour, we're going to be joined by some gentlemen from the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce. And we're going to be talking about the first half of the legislature and what they think are significant issues in the future, in the second half of the session. The reason I mentioned the first half is because it is over. The legislature is out of town. At about noon today, the North Dakota House finished up its first half work, and the Senate met for about half an hour this morning, voted on a few bills, and everyone left. The North Dakota House had 13 bills to deal with, and they finished up just before noon, and they're now on what we call the crossover break, and they have tomorrow off plus Monday and Tuesday of next week, and committee hearings will resume on Wednesday at 9 a.m. The committees have various starting times next Wednesday, 9:30 a.m., but the legislature is out of town for the next several days, and so we won't have breaking news from the legislature, but of course there's quite a lot to talk about. Today, the House handled most of the significant legislation because they had more bills to do. They approved some property tax measures. One of them gives an 8.5% credit against property taxes that would cost approximately $150 million over 2 years. Another bill is the governor's education finance plan, which is also being advertised as a major property tax relief measure because local school districts make up a great percentage of a person's property tax bill, and this measure greatly increases state spending on local schools. And the calculations are that if both of these bills will reduce a person's property tax bill by more than 30%, it's a significant decrease. We also have this today, the Department of Public Instruction's budget bill was passed, and a number of other measures that relate to education. The Republican and Democratic leaders, after the break was reached today, have varying interpretations of how things are going. The Democrats are saying that essentially that there needs to be more emphasis on property tax reduction and less on income tax reduction, particularly corporate income tax reduction. That Republicans have shortchanged such things as early childhood education, arts, certain types of food programs that benefit young children, whereas the Republicans say that what we need to do is cut taxes, pay for priorities in spending such as infrastructure, aid to state education, and also put aside a substantial reserve, and the reserves are quite large. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars in reserve. And one of the things that was dealt with in the House today is what we're going to be talking about for the next half hour. It is the state employee pay package. The House and Senate have differing visions on what this should be. The biggest difference between the House and Senate pay packages is that the House version does not increase contributions to the state employee pension fund, whereas the Senate package increases contributions to the pension fund by 2%, 1% provided by the state government employer, the other 1% by the employee. And again, we have with us this evening Stuart Savalcol, who is the director of the North Dakota Public Employees Association, and also Senator Ron Carlisle, a Republican from Bismarck, who is intimately familiar with state employee issues. Mr. Savalcol, could you just describe for us what the differences are between the House and Senate pay packages?
First, Dale, thanks for having us on here and giving us the opportunity to talk about this real important subject. The biggest difference between the House's version of the state employee compensation plan and the Senate's, as you mentioned, has to do with the NDPERS retirement system. Essentially, the governor appropriated, or in his budget, he wanted to include contribution increases to the retirement fund by 1% by the employee, 1% by the employer each year of the biennium, working out to a total of 4%. And the House's version of that bill strips that from the plan. And then just simply they decide, well, since the employee isn't going to be making that increased contribution, then the raise doesn't need to be as high. But that's where the savings comes in. That's where the huge cost difference between the House's plan and the Senate's plan is. The issue is that by doing that, by reducing that amount, you are dramatically affecting the immediate salary of the average state employee, but also the long-term earnings of that state employee. And while employees are making that, while they have to give that percentage back, that doesn't occur until January. Increases usually come into effect in July. So there's a full 6 months there where an employee should have gotten a raise that now they're not going to get. And that amount, that the overall salary, is how their retirement calculation is computed. So by reducing that number, you're also reducing the future retirement earnings of the state employee.
Senator Carlisle, could you describe what the Senate package is and what the logic was in supporting what the governor said?
Certainly, Dale, and thanks for having us. The Senate essentially bought off on the governor's compensation package that has happened before, and so we're going to be probably working with the governor's office, and there is, as Mr. Savalcol said, there's some significant differences between the House and the Senate, and we're just, as we say, just getting dance partners now, and then we'll get the band put together, and we'll there's a lot of work to do to work this out, obviously, in conference committee. I agree with Stuart that the no contribution increases the retirement fund. That's huge because, just for example, in the Bismarck area, we have over 4,000 state employees and their families, and they watch their retirement very, very closely. And there's going to be some, obviously, proposals to change it, but the facts are you have to fund the compensation fund for the existing employees so they have sure and certain relief. It's kind of, to me, it's like a moral contract when you sign on. So I think that difference is the others can be worked out, but this absolutely needs to be worked out. Either if they're going to run two funds, we got to pay for them, but the pension fund has to stay whole for the thousands of workers that are counting on it when they retire.
Mr. Savalcol, how does this affect the long-term viability of the pension fund if these contributions do not take place? Because at present, the fund is underfunded, and there was a rescue plan, if I could call it that, approved 2 years ago by the legislature that counted on these added contributions in order to restore the fund to health in the long term. And if these contributions don't go in, what happens?
Well, it's important to note that the reason why we're in this pickle is because of the massive stock market collapse of 2009. Most folks would tell you that was probably the third worst stock market decline in the history of Wall Street. And so the fund lost a significant portion of its holdings. And we knew that if we didn't start injecting more money into the fund, that it would eventually go broke over the next 40 years, is what the actuary said. So they decided that we did have 8% contributions going into the fund. We needed to get it up to 16, we decided, which is actually puts us far more in line with national averages. The fact that ND PERS had survived as long as it had on 8.12% contributions is really impressive, and it speaks to the astute investments that the folks made back in the past. Well, a bill was put in 2011 to increase those contributions by 8% over the next 4 years. What the Senate decided to do was say, hey, we're going to get back together in 2 years for another party anyways. Let's take a look at how the market's done in that time, and maybe we won't need to pass these additional increases. Well, PERS is certainly doing very well this year. It was somewhere around 10.7% returns, where it's doing quite well. Last year it didn't do so well. And so we're in a place where we've stopped the bleeding, but the fund isn't on the path to recovery unless we do this additional set of increases. Now, I think it's worth pointing out that we're not asking the state to do this entirely for us. In the rescue plan put together by the previous legislative session, the one that was included in the governor's budget, that's a shared contribution. Employees are feeling the hurt as much as anyone else. And the nice thing is, once we get that fund back to 100%, those contribution increases turn off. So the state would be able to stop making its additional contributions, and the employee would then get that money back in their salary. So I think everybody wins the sooner we can turn those contributions off and get the fund back to 100%.
Well, if these contributions aren't made, we don't need precise numbers, but what is the impact on the fund's path to health again?
I would argue that it would stay relatively stagnant. The fund's at about 67% funded level right now. It's unlikely to improve without the fund outproducing our forecasted. We assume that they can make 8% annually. If you don't, Ron's got it right there. I'll let him piggyback on this. But if you don't do these increases, the odds are that it's going to stay at roughly that 67% indefinitely.
Senator Carlisle, what is the importance of this in terms of frankly, the competition for labor? State government competes for labor in North Dakota just as everyone else does. And as you know, we have a rather tight labor market in North Dakota. And how is the Senate compensation package, which is larger than the House, how is that going to help the state government compete for labor?
Well, you're exactly right. It is a tight job market. In the old days, you could post a job, you have a lot of applicants. Not anymore. We're in competition out in the sector, which is a good thing, so we need to step up to the plate. We need if we're going to literally probably at one point, the pension fund could be a recruiting tool. We have the medicals, we have the pension, we have a very good work environment. But yes, you're exactly right. Our turnover rate has gotten a little higher. Last couple of years used to be in that 8%, and that was pretty tolerable. A lot of firms that's inched up, and as you know, especially the Bismarck area is on fire right now. You either check homes, check job listings. It's a very tight market, so we have to compete with everybody else. And I did want to make one note on our retirement plan. As opposed to a lot of plans around the country, we don't have a COLA clause, and we don't have any medical benefits. So our plan has the ability to sustain with a little help, and we think those retirement contributions with the state and the employer are absolutely critical to make it work.
Yeah, one of the things that Senator Carlisle was referring to is that a state government pension, once you start receiving it, there is no inflation adjustment. Some state government pension plans do have an inflation adjustment for employees, and if there is to be an adjustment for employees who are already retired in the North Dakota system, the legislature has to approve it. And that has been done, but given the condition of the fund presently, the prospects of an adjustment of that nature are fairly remote. Right. And also, could you talk about Senator Carlisle? Could you talk about what are the wage increases in this? We've been talking about the pension and the effects on the pension from this compensation package. What sort of wage increases are included in this package, in the Senate package?
Okay, the governor's package, i.e. the Senate package that we have obviously bought into, is performance-based. It's from 3 to 5%. The extra 2% are for exceptional employees. We have folks down in the lower market quartile that will get extra bump to get them in what's called compression for the first time. The folks over at PERS say that we've on a really good road to solve the compression issue where new employees and existing employees, that's always been a problem. The overall goal, another thing, is the market policy point that's called the MPP. Ours is set, i.e. the governor's, 100%. For example, the House is looking at 95. That can affect some things. Also, the salary ranges are going to be, there's some more 3% range increments in 2013 and 14. So, and then plus the retirement contributions where the employee, as Stuart said, and the state each kick an additional % each year to make the fund whole. I think it's a terrific package. It's performance-based. If you're doing your job, you have the 3, and if you're doing an exceptional job, you've got a potential for 2% more. And if you're on the lower end of your salary range, you have potential for even a little more salary. And I did want to make one comment, Dale, on that the retirement fund with no additional contributions that could affect our bond rating. And to some of us, we think that's a pretty big deal. If even from just a PR policy, if you will, standpoint, we want our bond rating up there because we're a state that's cash flowing, and we've earned a good bond rating. And I don't think we want to do anything to give us any kind of a little hint that things aren't so good, because we got a lot of people come to state looking for jobs.
Mr. Savicle, could you kind of compare the House and Senate plans on when it comes to wages?
Well, essentially the House plan results in having one less percentage available for increase each year. So you go from having a potential 5% raise to just a 4% raise. The other really crucial thing, about 2 years ago, the legislature decided we wanted to get away from this sort of across-the-board mentality for salary increases. And what they wanted to see was a more market-based approach to giving raises. Essentially, if you've got a job where somebody's making 10% behind the market and somebody else is making 1% above market, why are you giving them the same percentage increase? It doesn't make sense. And so the legislature contracted with a group called the Hay Group, and they did a lot of compensation. They gave the state a compensation philosophy. They helped the state figure out where we are at in terms of our ranges. And they said, if you're going to really have a competitive market-based approach to compensation, you should set your market at 100%. You should set your wages at 100% of what the market is. What the House version of the bill attempts to do is set it at just 95% of market, so they want it reduced, and then they want to freeze that for 2 years. They don't want they don't want the state human resources to adjust that market at all during those 2 years. That's pretty dangerous when you consider the changing economy of North Dakota, just how fast things are moving here. To lock those raises in place, or to lock those markets in place, is really a dangerous move. And I think you're looking at a state where we've got hundreds of state employee job openings right now. We're not at the market. We're not competitive, and we've got to do something to be better about that. Otherwise, you're talking about public services not getting delivered to people, and that's a public safety issue, I'd argue.
How can you describe how the pay plan affects medical benefits?
Oh, well, both versions of the bill, both versions of compensation allow for a fully funded health insurance premium. That, some would argue, is impacted by the recent national health care reform. Nobody wants to make too many changes to our current plan. We're grandfathered in under some under health care reform, so we didn't have to make as many sweeping changes to our plan. So that's relatively good, although it's worth pointing out that state employees do pay roughly 30% of their total medical costs when it's all said and done, when you figure out co-pays and things like that. So,
hello, this is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio program. In our second half hour, we're going to be speaking to Andy Peterson. the president of the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce. We also have with us this evening Dakota Draper, the president of the North Dakota Education Association, which soon will be merging with the North Dakota Public Employees Association to become North Dakota United. It sounds like a football club to me. I mean,
I get a lot of that.
Sounds like a
soccer team. A soccer team.
I get a lot of that.
Yeah, and because I think about West Ham United and some of the English soccer clubs that have United in their names. It'll
just as exciting.
Oh yes. I'm sure that you'll be able to sell very expensive tickets to watch you do your thing. We have reached a break point in the legislature. It's called the crossover break, and the House and Senate finished their work today. They're both on vacation. Maybe is a bit of a grandiose term in this case, because most of the legislators go home and try to get caught up on their regular jobs. But the legislature does not meet tomorrow and does not meet Monday or Tuesday. The hearings begin again Wednesday. One of the things that was done today, which we're going to be discussing with Mr. Peterson and Mr. Draper, was the House approved the governor's education bill, which includes a fairly good spending increase on state aid to schools. And it is also being advertised as well as an education bill. It's being advertised as property tax relief because school districts account for a fairly large portion of an individual's property tax bill. And the theory is that if state aid to schools increases, that school boards will lower property taxes and people will have smaller property tax bills. But this plan also has, frankly, quite extensive implications for academic instruction in local schools and what is considered to be a adequate education, how that's paid for. And Mr. Draper, could you please tell us what you think about the governor's approach and how it will affect instruction in the classroom?
I don't know if it really has that much of a direct effect on instruction. It's mainly the funding. The governor, you're talking about House Bill 1319.
Yes.
Which is really, the governor is trying to implement a new change in the funding formula. And it's reflective of adequacy. And it's not really, in the bill, is not prescribed, what is an adequate education. That's certainly a school board's prerogative. But it's trying to find out how a school board is compensated in an adequate way. The governor based his proposal on, if you remember back in 2008, the Auden report, the PICUS report, which is written by Alan Auden. And in that report, the PICUS report, they came up with a kind of a figure at that time. This is what you need to provide a North Dakota student, wherever he or she is in the state, with an adequate education. What the governor did was he took a 3% increase in it, like adjusted for inflation, and came up with a new per weighted student payment of $8,810. And for reference, that was quite a jump. $3,980 was what we're working with this year. So the governor is moving a lot of money, yes, you mentioned, into property taxes, and I believe that number is around $700 million in terms of offsetting the property tax. And it's trying to find a way for the state to make things equitable across the state. There's a lot more details, and I must admit to you and your audience that we don't have to go down too far down the road before I start getting lost in a lot of those little details in terms of how this actually works, because when you start talking about particular districts, what we've been telling our folks is that it's not the same for every district. Every district doesn't get a percent increase. Like you're going to get here in this school district a 6%, and you're going to get a 4%, and you're going to get a 12%. That's actually what it is. It floats around, and it's a little bit of a moving target. And I think that's what the legislature struggled with in this first half of over on the House side, is trying to figure out how exactly do these numbers work. And I think they still kind of struggle with some of them.
I think there's no question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mr. Peterson, what do you think this education bill, what is the impact going to be, do you believe, on property taxes?
Early on, the governor talked about this. This particular bill is lowering property taxes by about 15%, roughly, per residence. And that, I think, is a good start on property tax reductions. I think, given what we went through the last year or two with Measure 2, I think we've got a ways to go on it. I think it's a good start. I think the governor did put a lot of thought into this. I think he believes it is sustainable for the long haul. And there are some legislators, I am told, and that I had discussions with, that wanted to see that number go even higher. But there were some school districts that didn't want that. They wanted some local control there yet. So overall, I think it's a good bill, and I think it'll sail through the Senate side.
One of the things that is going to be a big topic of conversation in the second half of the legislature, or the second, I feel more comfortable referring to it as the second third of the legislature, because we have the point up until the crossover break where we are now. We have the second half of bills being voted upon, and then we have conference committees, which is like the final period in a 3-period hockey game. One of the things that's going to be focused upon is taxation policy. Should there be income tax cuts? To what extent should there be income tax cuts? Should there be, and what strategy should the state follow in trying to drive down local property tax bills? Now, one of the biggest income tax bill in the House provides, I believe, $360 million in individual income tax cuts over 2 years, and approximately $140 million in corporate income tax over 2 years. The governor had a package that was $125 million over 2 years. The Senate's package is $250. I get what I wanted to ask you, Mr. Peterson, was where does the Chamber of Commerce, what does the Chamber of Commerce favor in terms of the balance between income, property, sales if necessary, and also the size of each? Yeah,
originally we called for a one-third kind of approach to this paradigm. And I understand that there are some vehicles coming out of the House side especially that would apply to that level. So 1/3 income tax, 1/3 business tax, and 1/3 property tax. Again, anything can happen. It's a game, as you talk about, that we're moving through, and we'll go through these conference committees. I don't know that we'll see the final outcome until the last third of the game, but we're hoping for some fairly large and significant tax reductions. And what we found out in the last session, when we reduced things by approximately 20%, is that we made that up and more. So our state is doing very, very well. The thing that we do like about these kinds of numbers is that they are flexible. So if the state got in trouble, we could adjust them and bring them up or reduce them, whatever we need to do. So I think flexibility is the name of the game, but to answer your question directly, we called for 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3, and it looks like, if the House had its way today, we would make that.
Yeah, well, when you mentioned we made that up, you're referring to there were income tax cuts by the last session, but at the same time, the actual revenue generated by those income taxes, even at a lower rate, exceeded what was being collected before.
Correct. So we did very, very well as a state.
It was almost like a supply-side approach, and
it kind of was.
That worked out quite well. Mr. Draper, what sort of policy does the NDEA favor when it comes to the balance between income and property taxes, for example?
Well, I think as we look at it slightly different, because our schools are funded primarily through taxes of various sorts and nature. We're not opposed to tax cuts, and we recognize in this state that we have a fantastic opportunity to do things along the line with taxes, but we also have a fantastic opportunity to do the lines in terms of improving infrastructure, improving schools, and things like that. I think what's going to probably settle, in fact, I know what's going to happen now, what's going to happen in the crossover period here, they're going to take a look at what has exactly transpired between the two houses, where that leaves the state. I think in your second period of your hockey game, I think we're really going to have to focus on what exactly has happened and what do these cuts mean, and are they good, bad, or whatever. I'm certain your audience is would like to see tax cuts, but I also think they're also want to see the the infrastructure supported, the schools supported, the state moving forward in a positive direction. Not that tax cuts don't do that. I recognize that tax cuts have their ability to move a state forward. So it's going to be a matter of kind of evaluating where we're going to be as we go forward in this. And I'll be honest again that all the bills, at one time I was told there were 85 different bills dealing with tax cuts, and actually,
at least that many.
Actually, I was informed of one today I had not even heard of today, and I was like, really? And I never even heard of that one. So there's a lot, I think, what we need to do now is to try to take stock of where we're at, what's good, what's bad, what can be adjusted here, and I think that's what we're going to be doing. So in terms of where the association is, we're kind of in a wait and see. We'd like to see what's happened here. We are supportive of the governor's plan, but the other tax cuts, we want to see if they're going to be affecting the state and how they'll be affecting and what we can live with and what we can't live with, and so we'll take a look at that.
Mr. Peterson, how would you assess the legislature's work overall? What sort of things have they done that strike you as being good and maybe perhaps even not so good?
Sure. I think when we talk about addressing the infrastructure needs and the needs of western North Dakota, certainly this legislature to this point has been all about those kinds of things. And so I'm going to compliment them for getting after that kind of thing. I think on the other side, there has been some personal things that have gone on. The most recent one was yesterday, of course, the comment about the majority leader I thought was unfortunate. I think that particular legislator that made that comment, if she could have a do-over, she would take that do-over. And this was a very important lesson to her. So I think there were some personal things that went on as well that probably weren't very complimentary of the body itself. But other than that, I think they're right on track. I think they're making pretty good progress. I don't sense the same kind of feeling we had as last time. So I think it's a different group. So overall, I think to Dakota's point, we're going to get into the next period. We'll evaluate these things. We'll go through the same process again, and we'll see what comes of the whole thing.
Could you elaborate a bit on what you mean in terms of the feeling between 2 years ago and now? Yeah,
2 years ago, we did talk about some of the things like tax cuts and infrastructure, but I think there's a feeling now that this windfall that North Dakota has between agriculture, which is riding high, oil, which is riding high, manufacturing, which is coming back in our state. We have a really good sense of our economy right now, and so I think there's a confidence out there that we can do some things. Now, we all approach it differently. Where we'll end up, nobody knows at this point, but overall we have this confidence and this sense of self about our state that we are moving forward, and it's going to be a long-haul kind of thing for us. So that's different than last time, where last time we didn't want to overcommit to anything. We didn't want to spend too much. We didn't want to cut too much. People were unsure if it would continue. And I think that, to me, is the distinct difference between the last session and this session.
Mr. Draper, I'm interested to hear what you think of that analysis.
Oh, I agree with a lot of that. I think that the state is, and I would agree with the assessment that this session is a little bit more friendly, in quotes. I think that it is striving as hard as it can on a number of levels to try to find ways to move the state forward. We can disagree, certainly, on how that can best be achieved, but there does seem to be a little bit more of a, the incident you mentioned with the legislator today, that's unfortunate, but I don't think that's indicative of what's really going on. And I think that kind of thing happens with some people that when they let their emotions get carried away. But I think we're going in a direction I think that's very positive. We'll see what happens in the second period. I love your analogy of the hockey. Maybe we'll have to put some people in the penalty box.
Yes, indeed. For those who may not be aware, what the reference has been to an incident involving the majority leader and a legislator. There was a freshman Democratic legislator. Her name is Jessica Hake. She represents a Jamestown district. She was tweeting on the House floor, sending out tweet messages, and one of the messages she sent was that the House Republican Majority Leader, Al Carlson, had told her not to send tweets while the House floor sessions were going on, and she added a little it's called a hashtag, and I'm not that familiar with Twitter lingo. But anyway, she referred to Al Carlson as a Nazi. And this morning, she apologized for that. I mean, frankly, during her speech, she did not refer to just what it was she was apologizing for, but everyone on the House floor knew what was being talked about. And in her, just to give some context here, on the House floor and the Senate floor, the legislators, while business is going on, while it's being conducted, they are sending each other instant messages. They are sending each other emails. They are they are calling each other on the telephone on the House and Senate floors, because each of them has a phone that they can use to make phone calls. So it isn't as if there isn't a lot of intramural communication going on in the House and Senate while business is being conducted. It's a natural and accepted form of behavior. But what the difference here is that this comment was made on a social network that was accessible to others, and so that is how things got blown up a bit. And she apologized for this, and I don't think it really is going. I didn't think it really affected things that much. I mean, people thought, well, she's new, and social networks, people can put their foot in it, frankly, on a social network, and that's just what happened, and we move on from here. I was interested, Mr. Peterson, in your description, which I happen to agree with, in terms of the legislature 2 years ago being a bit more nervous, if I may use the term, about the permanency of the growth prospects, and now they're looking at it as, okay, we may have something here that has staying power, and let's proceed as if that's true. Should that in itself be a condition for, or a reason to be nervous? Because it's almost, as soon as you think you have good times and they're going to keep rolling, that's when they stop.
To that point, the economy certainly can change, and it can change on things that you don't expect. If we go back to 9/11, the economy was doing pretty well, and then, of course, that tragedy happened, and it wasn't very long thereafter that the economy really took a pretty sharp nosedive. There was some stimulus things that happened, and we did okay after that, obviously. But I use that point to say that something could happen in the world that we're perhaps not anticipating. And if that happened, of course, the entire economy could go down, North Dakota's economy could go down. But that all said, the beautiful thing about the legislative process, and one that I truly believe in, is that it is flexible. And if you don't lock things into stone, and this is one of the reasons that we fought Measure 2 so hard, and Dakota and I did travel together during that time, is that locked that policy into stone in our Constitution, where the legislative process, you can call a special session, you can adjust those things. So on many fronts, I think that we have real reason to be optimistic and to make bold moves, whether investing or cutting and these kinds of things, and then have the option of coming back and adjusting if we need to, if something were to happen, God forbid.
Yeah, and I would agree with that as well. I think that North Dakota has an opportunity that, Andy and I get to travel quite a bit. We go to other states, and we have our associations that we work with, and we hear really how bad is in other parts of the country, where they're just barely able to, keep the doors open in their schools and hopefully pay their teachers at what they were paying them 5 years ago, and furloughs, and we hear all these awful things that are taking place. So, but we have this opportunity, and oil is a finite, non-renewable resource, and this is a once in a, I was going to say generation, but I don't even know if it comes around every generation. I think
maybe once in a lifetime.
Yeah, in a lifetime opportunity for the state of North Dakota, and I think the legislature is taking stock of where we are, where we need to go, but obviously, yes. Who knows what the future will bring? What will happen? And people talk about the ride going on for 30 or 40 years, and that's fine, and that's a great idea. But geez, can it really go on this long? Because we all lived through the 80s when it happened last time, and it didn't go on for a decade.
I think we want to, in our own lives, whether it's personal or business lives, or our life, as a well, what's the word I'm searching for? anyhow, nonetheless, we want to make sure that we take risk. We don't want to just take crazy risks. And I think, to know what our future is to the best possible way and to prepare for that as best we can. And I do agree with Dakota that I think our legislature is looking at those kinds of things.
Well, one thing that that should be pointed out is that one thing that we have that we did not have, for example, during the 80s oil price rise and fall, is we have substantial budget reserves. We have enormous amounts of money put aside that could be drawn upon in the event of a big economic downturn, which these things did not exist in the 80s or, frankly, at any time in the history of North Dakota.
I would concur with that, and I think that if you look at the 3 constitutional funds, the 3 statutory funds, there's a lot of money tucked away in each one of those, and I think we are in pretty good shape, and I think we are the envy of our neighbors and certainly of our nation. They, look at National Geographic today talking about North Dakota and what's happening here. So, yeah, I think it's good.
I'd like you gentlemen, if you're comfortable with this, to kind of assess the session so far politically. I mean, who's gaining and who's losing?
I'll take a stab at that first because I see Dakota thinking a little bit.
I'm wondering about that one.
Dakota's a little nervous now.
I think the Democrats are starting to define a message. I don't know where that's coming from in their party. I have a good idea where it might be coming from, but I think through the process they're starting to frame up issues and look towards the future in a little bit of a long game, if I could use that term. I think the Republicans are looking a little more short-term at the moment and trying to capture what they can, having a supermajority, knowing full well that could change. I don't think they're looking quite as long. I think in the short game, I think the Republicans are winning. I think in the long game, the Democrats are starting to think differently, if I can use that term.
And how differently do you think?
Well, differently, you hear them talk about issues. I mean, they use some esoteric thing, this whole milk bill thing that's come along. You can see how that might be used in a commercial in the next election or 5 years down the road. And I think that the state Republicans really ought to learn a lesson from the national Republicans. And it's image oftentimes that helps you get reelected, and I think they need to, from my personal opinion, is maybe soften some of how they look to the general public, still accomplish their goals, which they're going to do, but soften their image a little bit.
What do you think, Mr. Draper?
Well, it's an interesting question. Honestly, we want to work, and what I think is working the best is the people that want to get something done. And I hesitate to use the word progressives, but they seem to be surging, if you ask me. The ones in both parties that really are willing to try to find a way to accomplish things.
The compromise piece?
The compromise piece. I see those people kind of winning. In terms of Democrats, Republicans, I venture not to go down that road in terms of, because really, from our association standout, it's who we can work with and who can listen to us and who can maybe help us in terms of moving something that we think is good. I just happen to know a bill that was passed, the Senate Bill 2229, which was a bill on trying to help pre-K start around the state. And it had bipartisan support. It was on the Senate side. Now it's going on the House side.
I'm terribly sorry. We'll have to end it here.
All right. That's fine.
We've been talking to Dakota Draper. He's the president of the North Dakota Education Association. We've also been speaking this evening to Andy Peterson, the president of the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
The legislature today is